Hello and welcome to this training session about how you're going to use MS Frog to help you during the implementation of an ISO management system within your organization. So jumping straight at it, this is your main dashboard, okay, where here you can see the implementation steps that we're going to go through. You're already in the intro training part. Next up will be the gap analysis, where you will answer certain questions that I'm going to explain later on in this training module, training course, and there's also going to be a place for you to upload documentation. I will then create your information security manual, and within it there are NXA controls. If needs be, we will create some processes depending on how you will answer the questions within the gap analysis. I will create them for you, and then you can edit them. And there's also the supporting system, where for the supporting system, I will provide you with certain Excel sheets. We will go through these sections one by one as we go along. For now, that would be the goal, because then I will use the internal audit module myself or one of my associates to run the actual internal audit for your organization to make sure that you are certified. So if you click on implementation overview, you're going to have some more detail on each of these individual steps. Okay, so for example, for the manual, there are all the screens, all the sections that we have to go through during this implementation. Okay, and right now you're in the introductory training. Okay, so that part needs no explanation. So let's jump straight into the gap analysis questions. Okay, so in the gap analysis questions, first of all, we're going to have the project brief. And in the project brief here, you will need to upload any documentation that you might have. Okay, so these might be any policies, any procedures, any forms, records that you use, any NDA, contract, policy, privacy policy. Maybe you have defined, I don't know, job descriptions, maybe you have a training plan, Excel sheet, maybe you have an equipment maintenance sheet, maybe you have an incident management process. Okay, so please upload all of these documents here. The more you upload, I will of course use the ones that are relevant for the ISO 27001 management system. However, given that this is a management system which talks about all aspects of your information security posture, then most likely, most of the documents that you're going to mention when it comes to information security will actually apply to this ISMS. Now, if you have sensitive documents, like for example, a penetration report, do not attach it. I don't need to access that information myself, neither any of my associates. However, feel free to tell me, for example, that you have that particular document, so I will know literally what all the documents that you have in your management system are. If you've had any external audits from certification bodies, possibly, or from clients or from suppliers, please add the findings here. If you didn't have any external audits, feel free to skip that section. If you have any external audit reports that you can attach, please attach them here. And here you just have to write the reason why do you want to get ISO certified. What is your main objective, okay, in getting this ISO certification? And where I want to spend most time in this video is relating to the next part, okay, which is the questions. So on the bottom right now there's me, but on the software there is a next button, okay, which will take you to the gap analysis questions. And as soon as you press that button, you'll get this screen. Okay, these questions will or might change over time. Okay, again, I believe in the idea of continued improvement, but ultimately the concept will stay the same. So if you open any section, there will be a list of questions. Okay, and the rating of the current state is something that you can avoid. Okay, if you think that it's relevant, for example, they have a secure development lifecycle in place, you can say maybe you can give it a rating of 2, okay, or maybe you can give it a rating of 5. But there are other questions, for example, company. What is your company name? Clearly, there's no rating relevant for that. Okay, so going through these topics one by one. In the first part, I want to understand what is your deadline in getting ISO certification. Okay, so if you are very tight on the deadline, I want to make sure whether it might be a good idea to actually start contacting the certification body right now to start the process of planning the date of the external audit. So we'll make sure that even the external auditors are available. Okay. But if you don't have any specific deadline in mind, or you want to get certified, I know within the next 3 months, 4 months, if that is your timeline, then we don't need to rush through the process, and we can start with the implementation process first. So in that part, that's what I want to understand. And when it comes to the company, I need to know the actual company name, okay, the official company name, the company website, products and services that you sell as a company that you'd like to include in ISO certification. So in my training video about ISO 27001, the foundation, I have explained about the boundaries of certification. And I said that the scope of certification will explain in a few words what you do as a company, and that this text will actually be available on your certificate once you get ISO certified. I will create that scope of certification within this, based on the information that you will give me here. So you can write, for example, if you offer IT managed services, just write that, and then I will explain and elaborate accordingly. If you sell 2 products, but you'd like to get certified for only one of these products, that is not a problem. You just have to tell me right in this section over here which is the actual product that you want to use. So if I go on your website and notice that you have 5 products, but here you've mentioned 2 products, it will mean that you want to get these two products certified. If you've generated any IP, what are the strengths and weaknesses, okay, of your information security management system, okay? And naturally, the more detail you go in, the more information I will have, and the more relevant the management system will be, okay? So, wasn't sharing the screen, so have you generated IP, strengths and weaknesses, okay? So, moving on, I'd like to understand a little bit about your industry landscape. So if your industry is highly regulated, then probably you have most of the elements needed. I almost dropped something. Almost all the elements needed from a management system in place to get this ISO certification. So from this section, you need to answer like how important is information security in your industry. If you are tight with any particular regulations, for example, DORA, you've been asked for NIST or for SOC 2 by your clients. Mention the more of these things that you can mention in these answers, the better it will be. What are the biggest threats you have in your industry? For example, if your industry is typically susceptible to certain types of threats, then mention that. And if you've had if you're prone to any cybersecurity attacks, for example, phishing emails, DDoS attacks, etc. If you're not familiar with this terminology, you can always search for it, or we can get into more detail about this. Maybe you can contact me, so we'll find alternative ways. Ideally, naturally, a person that is technical is involved and is part of the implementation team, so that they can assist with certain technical jargon or technical elements to having a secure information security management system. And if you are subject to any audits by clients, regulatory bodies, suppliers, etc., mention it here, apart from, as I mentioned earlier, ideally you put all the findings and attach the reports in the other section, in the project brief section of this gap analysis. In the development part, so if you do development, if you do coding, you don't need to do this part, okay? And here I also need to understand whether you outsource development or where you do it in-house, because that will affect how we will start working with the controls of NXA. Okay, so if you do the development, how do you consider information security in your software architecture? So, and when you're developing new features, so like in terms of processes, in terms of the actual architecture, how do you consider information security? Do you have any checks that you're doing? Are you using a tool that is checking the vulnerability and vulnerabilities within your code? You know, what elements are you making sure to protect your code, the actual security within the code of the product? If you have a secure development lifecycle in place, if you use different environments, staging, production, testing, what environments do you use and how do you use them throughout your development process? Who has access to the source code is an important question to help us understand who has access to what, either in terms of other software, possibly, and that is another question within this gap analysis, and whether you conduct regular reviews for your security vulnerabilities, either in terms of a software, for example, within your code, or else maybe you do penetration testing or other types of reviews for your security vulnerabilities. In the part about operations, I'd like to understand how many people you have in which section within your organization, and this will be the foundation of the organization chart that you need to build on later within MS-Frog. And if you work with any freelancers as part of your operational processes, okay? So there's an improvement that needs to be done over here. That's the idea of a management system that we're always learning. So what types of assets do you have? If you have physical laptops, documents, and other documents, do you provide mobile phones to employees, or do they use their own? Okay. If you have a process for handling incidents, if you have any type of information security policies, again, please attach them to the gap analysis. That is the general idea. But here I want you to, if you have uploaded something there and you want to add something, or you might want to ask a question on what types of, maybe you can give me a list of documents that you have and ask me whether they are relevant. It's important that any documentation that you have, it is communicated with me accordingly. And if you have a system for handling change that could impact information security or information security systems, it doesn't need to be a written change control policy, but maybe you say we have this type of meeting and we agree, and then the CEO decides what we're going to do if it can have that type of impact. That could be a very good start, actually, to having a policy around that topic. If you've ever had a breach yourself, okay, if you've had a security incident, how was it handled? So naturally, you don't need to go into the details of the technicalities of it, but I would want to understand in the process point of view how it was tackled. In the leadership, governance, and compliance, I want to understand if someone is responsible for information security. If you have a DPO, for example, you don't need to have a DPO. That's another question here, actually. But maybe someone else is responsible for information security, and the DPO is just a part of your management system, or maybe that particular function is subcontracted in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't really matter where you put in the information in these questions. You can just use them as brainstorming tools for you to provide us with the information, with as much information as you can about your information management system. Naturally, don't say things that you're not actually doing, because then we'll understand and we'll assume that you're doing it, and then we'll create the policies revolving around that fact, and then you'd need to actually start doing it. So if you can actually tell us what you are doing, and then if there is any improvement that needs to be done, we'll guide you towards which improvement you actually need to do to be compliant with ISO 27001. Okay, so at the gap analysis stage, it's important that you give us the current situation of what you actually have, not what you want to start doing. So once again, use these gap analysis questions as a place where you can think or brainstorm about different things relating to your management system, input the information about what you currently have. What regulations are you subject to? GDPR, DORA, and maybe other regulations relating to information security, of course. If you've done a DPA, okay, data protection impact assessment, or any other risk assessment done by someone, what type of data do you handle? Of course, this has implications in terms of those regulations and in terms of certain processes that we might need to include depending on the risk level within your organization. I would determine whether these processes are needed or not. For now, you just have to give me the information. So, have you classified your documents? If you have a DPO, we spoke about this. If you have an insurance policy, I'm not saying that you need an insurance policy. I'm just asking you if you have one. Because if you have one, then that can mitigate certain risks. In terms of people, do they work from home? Can they work from anywhere? Do they work in a cafe? Of course, there might be different risks associated to each one of these. Can people use their personal phone for work-related matters? And if they can, are there any policies in place? Can they download Outlook, for example, on their phone or their 2FA software authentication tools and not have a password on their phone? So these are maybe some questions that you could start asking yourself whilst you are seeing these questions. Do you have a policy that talks about clear desk and clear screen? We've mentioned policies many times. This is another topic. And if you don't have a written policy, but you have an idea in mind of how you'd like things to be, go ahead and write it in there as well. Do people know that they can, what they can and can't do with company provided devices? So if you gave them a laptop, can they install software? How should they protect it when they are not within the office? Do you provide information security training? Yes or no? And if you do, what type of training? If you're thinking about doing it, say what type of training you want to start doing. And if you track and measure employees' knowledge in security and information security. For example, do you perform phishing simulations to test employee awareness? So here we're seeing, like, in terms of your organization, what measures are you doing to make sure your employees actually understand that there are so many information security risks that they are prone to, like someone might impersonate someone else, send them an email, which might be dodgy and off. And in that case, we shouldn't say maybe George was in a bad mood or maybe he was in a particularly good mood. Maybe we should call George to see if he actually sent that email. So this is the type of thinking that we need to start having. We don't need to, go overboard with these things, but the idea that I'm trying to, the information that I need from these gap analysis questions is to start, first of all, getting you thinking about your information security management system, but to give me full clarity of what you are thinking about all of these topics in your mind about what you're actually doing right now, okay? If you sign an employment contract with employees, does it have confidentiality and maybe an NDA clause with it? Do you have an offboarding process and onboarding process? Okay, so these are important things that I need to understand to create a management system that is relevant to your exacting needs. Do you have any KPIs, goals, or targets for your information security? For example, the number of hours of training that you want to give your employees, the number of incidents that you want to have, the number of penetration tests you want to do per year, the number of improvements you want to achieve in terms of your information security management system, maybe number of projects you want to implement. Or number of actions for improvements based on ideas from employees. So they don't necessarily have to be technical objectives. just think about where would you like to go in terms of objectives for the information security of your management system. And it's important that these objectives have a goal, have a number associated with them. They have to be SMART, so specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and relevant. For now, for now, you just have to be as specific as possible and to give me a number. For example, to say to train devs more than 8 hours per year. Okay, so that would be enough. I can work on the rest. And the more ideas you present that are relevant to your business, the better it would be. If you have any tools to help you with threat intelligence, how do you monitor the capacity of information processing facilities or human resources? What would happen if someone were to leave? Is there an issue in terms of you're going to have huge brain drain? Or maybe if someone leaves, certain processes can't be executed because no one else is trained on them. And what if that person is sick for a very long time, or they win the lottery tomorrow and they decide not to come up? So here, earlier I mentioned to mention for you to say what you're doing right now. But if there are any risks right now that you think that you need to action, include them as well, okay? And even if you have any plans for the future, just be clear that these are plans for the future and these are threats, okay? So feel free to write whatever you'd like to write in these sections. If you ever did penetration testing, if you have a disaster recovery plan, business continuity plan, if you have a maintenance plan for any equipment that you might have, like if you have fire extinguishers, if you have maybe a fire suppression system, these things would need to be taken care of. But if you mentioned that you don't have an office, then there will be some things that I will exclude, okay, from within your management system. But still, you can not have an office and tell me that you need to have a maintenance plan for certain equipment that might be relevant for your business. Once again, keep in mind that ISO 27001 can be implemented by different types of organizations. So flexibility is key, and even for same companies within the same industry, there might need to be flexibility. So I just want to understand your current state. In terms of suppliers, what type of cloud-based services do you use? The more detailed the list is, the better I will understand what you do as a company and different types of elements within the management system that I can adjust accordingly. What type of suppliers do you use within other elements of your ICT supply chain? Maybe you have someone where you buy hardware from, or where they service your equipment, or maybe they handle your IT, or maybe they are your law firm which reviews the ICT or supplier or software terms and conditions, for example. So all of these types of suppliers are within your supply chain of your ICT services. All tech stack, so please mention all types of software that you use in your day-to-day operation. And if you do any checks when you are onboarding any suppliers, maybe you send them a questionnaire, or maybe you check their reputability, or maybe you use a KYC software, or maybe you work with suppliers that are referred to you. Okay, so there might be different levels of checks that you might be doing to your suppliers. And if you create tailored supplier agreements, or do you use agreements provided by your suppliers? Okay, so if you use both, mention that you use both and explain when would you use what. If you have an office, if it's yours or if it's rented, are you responsible for its upkeep? Here we're alluding, of course, to the idea of equipment maintenance. If you don't have an office, you can skip these questions. If you have an office, whether you have any physical or technical security controls in place, like a CCTV camera, like access control, like maybe you have a security guard, any types of controls that you have, if you are actually housing and running any critical IT systems, or maybe you have an actual server, if you have any backup power systems, so in case the electricity goes off, and maybe here you can also mention any other, like if the internet goes off, if you have redundancy in terms of that topic. And how do you protect your servers and network equipment from physical threats like fire, water, damage, etc. Okay. And if you have any secure areas, so if you have servers, for example, that the server room would definitely be a secure area, or maybe you have the office of the CEO, which might have sensitive information lying around on the desk, unless the CEO is very abiding by the clear desk policy, but CEOs sometimes they're not. So maybe that might be a secure area where the CEO would then need to lock their office when they leave. So these are, again, it's not only about cybersecurity, it's about information security as a whole. Does your network within the office use cabling? If you use cables, how are you protecting such cables? Okay. And the last section relates to technology. So do you have an MDM in place? Who has control to which software? Excuse me, who has access to which software, and how do you control that? So how do you grant access? How do you remove access? And how do you know which job title should have access to which software? Which person should have access to which software? If you handle privileged access management, whether you have any firewalls, intrusion detection systems, any type of systems that are helping you with your information security measures that are automated or possibly manual. How do you ensure email security? If you have a mobile device security policy in place. So again, mentioning policies, just to get your brain thinking about any types of policies. And please, if you think of a policy whilst you are going through these questions and maybe of another document, and you remember that you have that document, please go back to the project brief section to actually upload that document in the relevant section. If you use MFA, okay, so multi-factor authentication or 2FA, and which software is using this type of functionality, and possibly is there any other software which isn't using this functionality, and how do you manage user identity and authentication? Okay, so do you have an IAM policy in place, and how do you handle user access reviews? By answering these questions in as much detail as you can, I will be able to have a very good understanding of your information security management posture, and I will be able to finalize the gap assessment whereby I will understand what your current risks in terms of information security are, what you're doing right now to mitigate those risks, and possibly even what are your plans in terms of improving. Of course, you're going to explain that if it's a plan, you're going to tell me in your answers that it's a plan. So based on that information, I'll be able to create a management system in terms of the information security manual and Annex A controls that best meets your needs as an organization. And once that is done, if you click next, you'll go to a results page, which, as I mentioned earlier, if you're not going to fill in the stars for each question, it's not going to work, but that is not very important for you to achieve ISO certification, so you can just skim through that part. And then this is how I will populate the information on MS-ROG. Okay, so I will fill in the information on these screens. Okay, so for example, for the context analysis, I will do a SWOT analysis for you. I will perform the risk assessment for you based on the SWOT analysis. I will define some information security objectives, and as soon as I'm ready, you will have this screen, all these screens pre-filled with information that is relevant to your business. What you need to do then is to go through it again and edit accordingly. The Annex A controls will be on this particular screen, okay, where they will be split into 4 sections like so. So there's going to be the organizational, the people, physical, and technological, okay? And for each one of these controls, within it, I will define what type of risk do you have, Okay, so for example, policies for information security. If you have 0 policies for information security, there's likely going to be confusion about who needs to do what and when in terms of information security. Then I'm going to define for you also the likelihood and impact to define the inherent exposure, and I'm going to define mitigation actions that you can take or that you're possibly already taking in terms of the risk that we will have discussed here. So if we're going to say here that, for example, the relevant information security policies will be created throughout this ISO 27001 implementation journey, then that is the action that we're taking. If this action isn't available, then you're going to define whether it is non-existent, an initial, managed, or optimized. If you feel you need to add a task for whatever needs to be done here, go ahead and select the appropriate user and do that. I will also pre-populate for you the residual risk after this mitigation action has been implemented. Okay, for now, it might look a bit vague because all the screens are empty. However, I strongly suggest that you start filling in the gap analysis questions and go into as much detail as possible, and possibly do it over 1 or 2 sessions to let your brain, marinate on the ideas that we're talking about in this section, so you can answer them in as much detail as possible, and possibly even include as many of your colleagues as possible to brainstorm a little bit about these topics. So then, based on that information, I will be able to create the most relevant management system for you so that you can review and edit accordingly. For now, that is all I had for this video. I hope that you found it useful, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to help out. Thank you so much.